Hello. Hello, everybody. Hi. Thanks for your patience while we sorted out some of that seating. Thanks for coming. Happy Heritage Festival. I hope we've all been out through the city this weekend and enjoying so many of the wonderful things that Ballarat has to offer over Ballarat Heritage Festival. It's a very packed calendar. And so it's a busy time for history lovers in Ballarat, and I'm glad that you chose to come and see us today. So thank you. So, welcome to this Ballarat Heritage Festival event presented by the Eureka Centre. My name is Sarah Vanderwell and I am the Education and Public Program Officer here at the Centre. Say that 6 times fast, it's quite a mouthful, isn't it? I would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather here today on the lands of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And I would like to honour and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend this respect to any other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that may be present or who may end up watching the recording of this later on. So you may be wondering what a woman with a surname like Van der Waal is doing chairing a discussion about the lost Irish women of Eureka. My maiden name is actually Kelly. And my mother's maiden name was Fitzpatrick. So my family journeyed here to Australia in the 19th century from places like Galway, Tipperary, Cork and Clare. One of my favourite things about growing up was sitting around the kitchen table and listening to the stories that my grandmother and great aunts and uncles would share about their grandparents and great-grandparents and their journeys to Australia and their lives in colonial Victoria. Many of my family actually settled in Bendigo, sorry. The women in my family, many of them took up occupation as nurses in Bendigo. And my favourite story though, and I'm so sorry given the context of today that this is actually a story about one of my male ancestors and not about one of my female ancestors. But I wanted to share it because I just love it so much. So family oral histories suggest that Thomas Francis Fitzpatrick, who was born in County Clare in 1846 and lived to the ripe old age of 102, was actually an accountant in Bendigo in the year 1900. And he was then offered a partnership with somebody who he was an accountant for. And then this partnership was in a new business that would be opening in 1900 Bendigo in a department store. Unfortunately, he did turn down the offer of that partnership, but remained Sydney Meyer's accountant for many years. Storytelling is such a rich and lovely part of our Irish heritage, so that when this project came to my attention, I was particularly interested. The Ballarat District Irish Association is launching a new project funded by the Public Records Office Victoria to highlight the contribution of Irish women to Ballarat's social, cultural and industrial development. The misconception that no women lived on the Victorian goldfields has been successfully challenged by historians in recent years. However, there remains a longing among current-day descendants to better understand their own cultural heritage. This project hopes to uncover individual identities of Irish women who contributed to life on the Ballarat goldfields using a range of family and archival sources. To that end, the association has engaged historian Lucy Bracey and creative Erin McCuskey to see this project through. Lucy is a senior associate with Way Back When Consulting Historians. Way Back When is a team of professionals who use their skills as historians to help communities, families and individuals tell their stories and connect with the past. And Erin McCuskey is the creative director of Yum Studio, a bespoke creative media and blended learning agency. Erin has a national reputation for unique cinematic screenworks that expand our experience of story. So please join me in giving a very big warm welcome to Lucy and Erin. I'd like to ask Erin to greet us in Irish language, or welcome.
Díríomh Erin is anam dom ta epithorum laur li vinyo. I'll just quickly back up though and say, Gab Moleshgel Lewel Gori Nilim Ag Ag Fornum. Apologies to the Irish speakers. Just learning. Do we have any Irish speakers, Gwelgori, in the audience? Fabulous.
No one can tell you.
It's an early win. So I started with by saying my name is Erin and I'm happy to talk with you today. Anam Mashinsa Minta Matha Tashut Erin Agus Mohatha Ipablak Neherin. I acknowledge my ancestors, my father's people of Northern Ireland and my mother's family of the Republic of Ireland. For me, a language spoken, even spoken badly, is a language honoured. Padraig Pearse said, Tagan tan ga, tagan anam. Give me another go at that. Tagan tanam, tagan anam. He said, a country without language is a country without soul. And I think sometimes we get worried about speaking our language in public when we maybe don't know what we're saying, and that is certainly my experience. Can I just get a show of hands of who here today has Irish ancestry? Bloody gorgeous. I went to the Ballarat District Irish Association. I spoke to Tom, who's Gwelgori, he speaks Gwelga, and I said to him, how can I tell people I only speak a little bit? And he goes, tell them couple of focal. Okay, I'll tell them that. Couple of focal means a couple of words. So I thought that was a really gorgeous thing. So Cade Miller Fulcher, 100,000 welcomes, because one welcome from the Irish is never enough.
Thank you, Erin. So, I've got some questions here today about your project. My first one is, this project is funded by the Public Records Office of Victoria, and I want to know, what was the application for the funding?
It was pretty straightforward. We wanted to do a manuscript of 9 women. We wanted to find 9 women who we hadn't seen before, Irish women, and we wanted to raise the profile of the Irish locally. We wanted to reveal a female perspective and also preserve family history for the generations, because what we wanted to do was, how do we get the past to talk to the future? That's what we were thinking. And it's also part of a zeitgeist that is going on. The Irish around the world currently are in a resurgence for language. How did I find, how to learn even what I've learned so far? Online. Because there's lots of us, but we have tended to, I don't know whether I should get in, I'll get into this now. So part of the reason why the Irish, we're all Irish here today, right? And we can pretty much tell from our foreheads, if nothing else. So how is it that we get to a point where the Irish are so many, but so invisible? And that's really what started the conversation. So part of the way that the Irish deal with leaving home and arriving here is that they will bring their cultural and emotional baggage, but they don't show it. Sorry, they don't tell it, they show it. So there's just a really interesting thing about the Irish. They take up the culture of the land where they arrive, right? We are great assimilators. We are the great assimilators. And sometimes that means that our culture takes a back seat, because it's not Irish dancing, it's just dancing. It's not Irish storytelling, it's just storytelling. It's not Irish song, it's just song. And so that's really why we decided at the Ballarat District Irish Association to find a way to raise the profile of the Irish here. So the Australian Embassy in Dublin says on their website that 30% of Australian people claim Irish heritage. and it looks like we're all Irish here today, which is amazing. I know when I went to school, my mum and dad came out here. Dad came from the north, mum came from the south and met out here. So we were Australian somehow, that happened. And when at school they would say, well, where do you come from? What's your, heritage? You'd say Irish. And often people would go, oh, everyone's Irish. Wouldn't they? So there was like, it didn't feel special. Well, now it feels special, and I think that's probably age, but it's also about the research that I'm currently doing as well. So we wanted to get Lucy on board as a researcher, and we wanted to find those women who hadn't been found before.
So when you're talking about women that haven't been found before, and it's called the Lost Irish Women of Eureka, are you looking for a particular kind of woman or a particular social class, women involved in the story of Eureka? So what sort of stories can we expect to see uncovered? What 9 women, what sort of stories are we going to see come to light?
Well, as we all know, the Eureka legend lives so large in our national story, but also a lot of people love connection to Eureka. So there's a lot of family stories where there's a connection of, oh, my great-grandfather was at the stockade or was on the goldfields at the time. Or I think Dorothy Wickham and Claire Jeffersoni have created the Eurekapedia, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, a wonderful resource. And I think at last count, something like 52 people claimed to be there when Peter Layla's arm was cut off. So, we know that that family history and Eureka, there's a lot of connections there. So we're looking for those impossible stories, those family legends of women who were on the goldfields in and around the time of Eureka. I mean, we would love to hear a story of someone who was a woman in the stockade, but it doesn't have to be that specific. It can be women who were on the goldfields during the Ballarat Gold Rush, women who have a family connection in that way. We'd love to hear all of that. It's quite broad in that regard. But the connection to Eureka helps to give it, to give it a bit of an anchor.
It's a timestamp.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. You've mentioned some of the research that's been done about women on the goldfields and women around Eureka before, and the work that's been done in this space. So can you tell us about how this project is different to the work that's been done previously, or how it adds to what we currently have?
Yeah. Well, so as I'm sure you're aware, there has been some amazing work already done about women on the goldfields, and we're so lucky we have Laura Johnson in the audience today, who produced this fabulous book, Women of Eureka, which was the first sort of foray into capturing those family stories of women connected to Eureka. And then I mentioned, Dorothy Wickham's work, Claire Jeffersoni's Eurekapedia. You probably all know of Claire Wright's Forgotten Rebels of Eureka. We've got, I think they're all in the bookshop here as well. And there has been even some creative pieces. There's a book of poetry that was written, Suzanne Cross, I think, wrote poems about women at Eureka too. So there's been lots of ways that historians have been finding ways of adding women's voices to the historical narrative, which is wonderful. I'm sure you'll all agree here, I personally feel we can never have too many women's voices in the historical narrative. So any project that amplifies women and their contribution to our national story, I think is very valuable. But as we sort of alluded to as well, this project, what is different about this project is not only raising the profile of Irish women, but it's also, we're really, really keen to hear those family stories and those connections, those stories of women who possibly aren't in the official archive. And we all know why I'm assuming, but there's a lot of reasons why women's voices are often not in the historical record, because they're just sometimes very difficult, if not impossible, to find in the actual archival sources. When women married, often they assumed their husbands' names, and therefore they literally lost their name, so that's erased from the records. If they weren't in jail and they weren't very wealthy, there's not really a reason for them to be recorded anywhere. so we really want to hear those, just those connections that people have, those family stories, those rumours to help add paint a bigger picture.
How much do you think your research will delve into archives, and how much do you think will actually rely on people here today or people who might watch this online, or whatever call to arms you sort of have? How much will rely on those family oral histories or myths, or even stereotypes around sort of women on the goldfields? How much?
Depends on you guys. I mean, however many stories we get given to us. So we've had a few, which has been great, but we have contact details after this, so please, if you've got a story, let us know. We'd love it to be included.
And a huge part of the stories and the voices, we're also putting together a short film. So women's faces. You can go into pretty much any antique shop and find photographs, and very similar to the ones that we're showing here today, which are all from either Eurekapedia, that's very hard to say. But it's not as hard as Eureka. or the State Library of Victoria. So we've actually found images of women. The iconic image for this talk is an unknown woman that we found in an antique shop. So, people were fine about taking pictures of women, but didn't necessarily write down, what it was about the women. And you can see lots of wedding photos up here because, hey, once a woman got married, that was the end of her life, right? She was off to be a wife. And so it's just really interesting that we have to dig through and find these, despite the beautiful big women that we've found who are Irish, like Lola Montez, Irish, Clara Seacamp, Irish. It would be great to herald these women as Irish as well.
Yeah, and I think that's why this partnership is really good, because so while the research is crowdsourcing stories as we can, my role as historian is to try to match up these stories with existing records, shipping records, electoral rolls, all those kind of newspaper accounts, that sort of thing. So the end product will be a research report that will then live here, so future historians can build on that, but it will also inform a creative interpretation that Erin will then hopefully use to bring to life, sort of filling the gaps that the archives cannot show us, so the emotional and the sort of, the feeling of it all.
And the fragments, right? We're often, as historians and researchers, we get really caught up on a start date and an end date, and they travelled here and they did this and they did that. And what we forget in the middle of all of that is that life went on, that these people danced and they sang and they told stories and they had beautiful faces that it would be lovely to show. So often the faces don't need to match the names. If you just have a photograph and you don't know, you maybe know a name or her first name, we're really interested in that as well, because when we pin these things together, they create a big picture, a pattern. They don't necessarily have to stand on their own. I think the Irish are great at this. The Irish are great at making really big statements and patterns. Mary Robinson, when she was president, first female president of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, talked about the Irish diaspora. She talked about bringing them home, not physically, but ensuring that our stories of here, our Irish stories of here, were available in Ireland as well. Because we're not alone. This is a pattern.
So talking about our stories here, why? Why are there so many stories here? Why did they come here? Why did the Irish travel to the goldfields in such large numbers?
Well, there's lots of myths. There's lots of myths. Lucy's got some of those, I think.
Yeah, well, Erin sort of mentioned it before, but the proportion of Irishness in Australia is higher anywhere else in the world than with the exception of Ireland, obviously, that connection. And there was a huge number of Irish immigrants that came to Australia. It was the second highest number of immigrants, aside from the English, that came out. So, yeah, we have a huge proportion of Irishness in us all. And there was some great quotes too from other historians. Dot Wickham again mentioned that, you know, the Eureka Rebellion, while not entirely Irish, was like a hugely Irish affair. So this rebellious spirit is really a key part of the goldfield story and the gold rush story. And then I think this is quite a controversial one, but Irish historian Patrick O'Farrell, he said, and I quote, "The distinctive Australian identity was not born in the bush, nor at Anzac Cove. These were merely situations for its expression. No, it was born in Irishness, protesting against the extremes of Englishness." So, you know, we can agree or disagree, but I think that's a really provocative statement and quite an interesting thing to keep in mind, when, especially talking about this story. But yeah, I mean, the reasons for coming here, I mean, there's multitudes, but in the scope of this project and looking at the connection to Eureka, you know, we're looking at the reasons for coming to the gold rush, and you've probably heard the discussions about the push and the pull factors. So the pull factor, obviously, the gold, the chance of riches, the chance of starting somewhere new, having the reinvention of oneself, the ability to escape, you know, the social hierarchies that maybe were inescapable in your homeland. But then the push factors, like some people really had no opportunities left in their homelands. And you consider the idea of moving, you know, 170 odd years ago, like that's it. Like if you leave your homeland, that's it. You're very unlikely to see your family ever again. The communication's very limited. So it was a massive deal. It wasn't just, oh, we'll try our luck on the goldfields. It was like, no, these were very calculated thoughts and decisions that were made. And I think it's very interesting looking at the census data. And again, just keep in mind we're very early days of this project. So, you know, I've got a few bits of research, but we're not experts yet. So, but the census data that comes out shows that I mean, loads of the gold rush immigrants were young single people, but the Irish in particular had the highest percentage of young, and I'm saying like 17 to 30-year-old. There's about 70% men and women in that age bracket from the island versus from England, which was like around the 40-50% mark. So like young, active Irish people were coming out here. And I think that's a really interesting, it's really interesting to know.
And it was about opportunity, right? So yes, it's about here, but it's also about there. So Lisa just talked about the push and the pull factor. For Irish people and for Ireland, we have become experts at immigration. Our people leave all the time, and they leave all for opportunity. And whether that's about escaping poverty, about finding work, we know that the Irish probably had three things going for them. That to be a good Irish person, you had to be a really, really hard worker, The second thing was you had to be able to talk and talk really well. And the third was good humour. So the Irish people were really, I was going to say welcome everywhere, but they weren't welcome here as much as they weren't welcome in other countries either, because they were more mouths to feed, right? And that, you know, the dirty Irish weren't to apply for jobs because there were so many other people, you know, in front of them. So there's all those things going on as well. And it's not like this project is going to answer any of those questions, but we feel like that will inform some of the background of the stories that come through.
So we've talked, just like branching off from that a little bit as well, you've sort of touched on the fact that there was some discrimination around Irish people on the goldfields and whatnot. Do you have any idea of how some of the ways which experiences for Irish women might have been different to other immigrants coming to the goldfields?
Well, we know that there's a lot of stereotypes about Irish that came out. So the idea that particularly women, you know, they were illiterate. Claire Wright even talks about Bridget Hines, who you may have heard about, and she famously hid her husband's pike and pants so he couldn't run out and join the fight. Well, she was said to have arrived with her brother off the ship, literally shoeless from Geelong. So the shoeless, the poor, the illiterate, those are stereotypes that exist. There was a lot of caricatures done about Irish people throughout the 19th century, and the caricature of the Bridget, the domestic servant who didn't really know what she was doing, was a bit stupid and a bit lazy. And then there was an older version of the older Bridget, the Mrs. Murphy stereotype. So you can find these in newspapers. And there was also an assumption, a belief that more Irish women ended up marrying or shacking up with Chinese men on the goldfields. So there's that sort of, so whether that's substantiated, there is some census data that, there's not a lot, there is some census data on marriages between Chinese men and non-Chinese women, and there, during that sort of 1851 to 55 period, and there is a number of Irish women, but whether that's also really a substantiated stereotype, or whether it's just two outside groups that are then being further pushed to the margins. So, you know, I would love if we could find an Irish woman who married a Chinese man to uncover that sort of story. So if anyone's got that connection, let me know.
And we should also probably acknowledge, we should definitely acknowledge the fact that the Irish were also part of the abuse that was perpetrated on First Nations people as well.
Definitely.
So, talking a little bit more, I think this is my last question about Irish on the goldfields. Erin, you've alluded to how Irish people would come here and then their culture would be absorbed, and it wouldn't be, you know, Irish culture, it would become storytelling rather than Irish storytelling. But how much do you think that because there was such a large population of Irish people on the goldfields, as you said, second largest to English, how would you say that Irish people really did sort of influence the character of the emerging colonial sort of society that we had here in Ballarat, and even the institutions as well? How would you say that Irish people...
Can I answer you in poetry?
Of course you can.
So this is in English. I will it's already translated is what I mean, so I'm just going to stand up for this. So what I'd like you to do is close your eyes. Just have a feel of the weather that you experienced on the way in today. Very Irish, misty, grey, beautiful, beautiful weather today. And I want you just to imagine yourself sitting inside, near a fire perhaps, watching the flames. A storm will cree when you're far away from the home you will soon be leaving. 'Tis many a time by night and by day that your heart will be sorely grieving. The stranger's land may be bright and fair and rich in its treasures golden. You'll pine, I know, for a long, long ago, and the heart that is never olden. A storm a cree in the stranger's land, there's plenty of wealth and wailing. There's gems adorn the grace and grand, there are faces with hunger paling. When the road is tiresome and hard to tread, and the lights of their cities blind you, oh, turn a store to Ireland's shore, and the one you leave behind. And now open your eyes and think about the Irish people who left. They never really leave. So their impact here is their Irishness, as Lucy was saying before. So it's not necessarily Irish dancing. The Americans kind of in a funny way invented what we now understand to be Irish dancing. The Irish called step dancing. But there are so many ways that the Irish bring and express their culture here. So for example, my dad would do this, he would just be like all the time, and you know, that was that's Irish dancing. Or he would get up and he would recite a poem. So maybe that was in honour of Dad today. So it's not necessary that we label things Irish as the expression of that thing, but rather the expression itself. And I think that's where the Irish have had a really big impact in the song and the dance, but also that really rebellious spirit that Lucy was talking about before. The trade unions, you know, would not be the same without the Irish people. And it's that rebellious spirit, I think, which really carries through. I mean, Eureka itself, dare I say. Yeah.
So you have actually covered my next question, but I'm wondering if there might be something a little bit more specific. I was going to ask you how the Irish influence resonates today and what its lasting influence is on Australian culture more broadly, which you've just sort of told us. But can you think of anything to add to that, or is there anything that's inherently Irish, and you would probably know best, having grown up with a father from Ireland, is there anything inherently Irish that's a part of our Australian vernacular that we do or say today that you think we might have inherited from those Irish ancestors?
Oh, like sayings, do you mean?
Oh, sayings or things that we do, or...
Yeah.
Sheila?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else?
Anyone else? Larrikin.
Larrikin, yeah.
That's a
So
good
there's lots of words and there's lots of phrases, and I think, you know, again, it's really interesting because it's those fragments that follow us from the past. You know, Dad used to always say, wherever you go, there you are. And that's kind of something that I hated at the start, but love now. Mum would say things like, Dún an Dorish Moshadheli, and we'd go, like, what? And she would say, close the door, please. We would have friends come over and stand in the kitchen, and Mum would ask them questions, and then we'd walk out and they'd say, what did she say? And I said, what do you mean? She'd go, what language was she speaking? I'm going, like English? What are you talking about? So, like, it was the thickness of the accent, you know, in that way. And I think that whole period of, you know, not feeling proud of who we were and now being able to bring that to the fore. And, you know, there's some not so great things as well, you know, so still again around that rebellious spirit. But you'll often hear Irish voices, perhaps CEO of Australia Post there for a while. There's some not great things. But, you know, ultimately it's the dancing. And I think we fall into this thing about, you know, just keep moving, everybody. Can I teach you something? So one thing I live my life by is dance every day. In Welga, in Irish, it's Dumsa Gakla. Will you say it with me? Dumsa Gakla.
Dumsa
Gakla. Yeah, dance every day.
Dance every day.
It's such a simple thing, and it's the... Oh, thanks, Lucy. It's the expression. It's the life experience, not the tradition so much, that the Irish bring.
Thanks, Erin. So let's sort of talk a little bit more specifically about this project and your 9 women that you're going to research. It is early in the process, as you've already told us, but have you found anyone that you think that you might actually go on to research more? Have you got any stories that you could share with us?
Yeah, I've got a few just like little tasters of stories that need further development, but one was shared by Erin from a relative of yours, somewhere along the chain. And so the story, or you shared with me, it was Anne or Anna McCuskey, who arrived via the Arabian in 1853. And so, and then at some point married a William Dix. And so I had a bit of a search there, and I found a shipping record for an Anna McCuskey on the Arabian 53. And then she had come out on a 3-month work contract. So as you know, there was a lot of, you could come out with assisted passage, which meant that your passage was partially or fully paid, but you then worked in exchange for that free ticket as such. And so she had a 3-month work contract. But then her marriage to William Dix also occurred that year. So I'm curious to find out, how soon after getting off the boat did this marriage occur? Did she get out of her work contract like many women did? Because, one of the things about women's story on the goldfields is there weren't as many women as there were men. So there were a lot of marriage opportunities for women if they were willing to go down that path. So that's an interesting one to requires more research. Laurel first mentioned in her book a story of a young Catherine Kelly who was a child, 6 years old, during Eureka, and she was one of the children who was taken off to Black Hill. And one of the stories says that local Wadawurrung people cared for the children during the night, or the morning of the stockade. And then recently I was just doing a search through Trove, which I'm sure you all love as much as I do, and I came across an obituary in 1913 for a Kate Kelly, and it was only about 50 words, this obituary. It was very small, and it said in it, deceased was in the Eureka stockade on the night before the attack. Her grandfather carried her away to safety. And so I'm like, is this the same? Is it the same Kate Kelly, Catherine Kelly? Maybe, maybe not. But that just line in the obituary is what I'm talking about, that connection, where everyone, like having that connection to Eureka, people, are very keen on that. So that's a cool one. A community member has shared with us a story about her relative, Bridget Lavery, who was Bridget O'Brien, and she's the daughter of Daniel and Catherine O'Brien. And in the story that she's shared, she said that the family rumour was that Daniel was present during the Eureka stockade, but when the fighting began, and there's different stories that different members remember. So one family member said, he said he was going to get water for the horses. So he went off to do that. So I said, no, it was water for the troops. And then another cousin said, actually, no, he said, I'm too young to die, I'm out of here. So,
water for himself.
Yeah, but as a result, his daughter Bridget was able to grow up with a father, and so so that's an interesting one to follow up with. We've got a few women publicans. So being a publican was one of the few opportunities available to women, respectable opportunities for them to earn an independent living. So we've got a story of Joanna Shelley, who from County Clare, who ended up being the proprietress of the Munsters Arms here in Ballarat for almost 60 years, like a massive tenure there. There is, this one's interesting, and I haven't been able to determine yet. So the person who passed this one on said, I think it's Bendigo, but maybe it's Ballarat. So trying to figure that one out. But this is a story of Margaret O'Leary, who was a publican. They're not sure which pub, but the family rumour was she kept order with a revolver hidden in her bustle behind the bar. But then in the submission, they also said that her grandson, this woman, Margaret, had such an influence on the family that her grandson, who's 2 generations Australian born, believed him to be 100% Irish. So, because of the strength of his Irish grandmother. So I think that's a lovely one too. We know a bit about the story of Eleanor Fern, who arrived in Ballarat in the 1850s, and then her and her husband ran Fern's Hotel, which was on the corner of Sturt and Albert Street, and then later purchased the George Hotel and ran that for a while too. So that's another one to look up. I got an email, there was a little article about this talk that was published in the Ballarat Times last week, and from that I got a little email from someone saying, I've got 2 stories for you, I'm really busy right now, but I'll tell you, I'll pass them on soon. And she said, they're both Catherines, One's the wife of a tent maker who, quote, totally went off the rails. So I'm keen to hear her story. That's all.
She sounds great.
Yeah. And another Catherine had a series of unfortunate marriages, starting off with a night cart worker in Melbourne, followed by a violent ex-convict who disappeared, and then she ended up on the Ballarat goldfields. So, I know, a lot of teasers there. But one that has been really a great thing that I found was a newspaper article that was written by Bridget Kirby. So she married Kirby, a tent maker, who had a shop, Thomas Kirby, inside the stockade at the time. And she was 16 when the rebellion happened, and she married Thomas in St. Elipius 2 years later. And she reflected back. There was a lot of reflecting back about Eureka over the years. Every anniversary, someone would publish a story, which is great for me because I love reading those. And so in this one, she reflects back about the newspaper headline was "A Very Irish Wedding at St. Elipius." And it's a very long and detailed article, but it says, I'll just quote you a small bit. "There are few of us who have not heard or at least read of the jollity in which weddings are celebrated in Ireland. Galore is the only genuine word for the plenty of an Irish feast. As all will admit who have ever been a guest at such entertainment, there are girls galore, fun galore, dancing galore, eating galore, and drinking. Of faith in regard to the drinking, we should need a word still more expressive than that excessive verb." So, yeah. So there's we've got
A lot so far.
yeah, but we still want to hear everything you have, and I think the beauty of this project too is that we do have a bit of flexibility, because I think the frustration for any of you family historians is when you do, as Erin said, you get the birth date, you get the death date, you get the immigration date, but you can't find anything in between, and you just feel frustrated. What was it like? So, you know, being able to draw some similarities between stories will be really great, and then to have the creative film bring that to life, I think will be really fun.
Because often we can fill in those gaps by really looking into people's faces, like seeing what's there, or is it feeling what's there? And it's understanding that photography itself is a material of the past, and the people in those photographs are of the past, and every photograph you take is the past trying to talk to the future. And that passage of time, we as really complicated human beings can fill in those gaps. And that's the importance of having those images, having something to ponder about.
I was about to ask you about what was the importance of the film, do you think, Erin? But I think that you might have just answered that. You're welcome to elaborate if there's anything else you wanted to add about your film.
So the film will be mainly images. How they come together generally is the way that they talk to me in the edit suite. And so I work a lot with archival dancing women, and looking and doing some research into finding some moving image. Like it's pretty non-existent, but I think we can fill in some gaps there, depending on the archives that we're looking at. So there's some beautiful stuff online now that never has been online before. Like, this is the beauty of the internet and of the capacity of AI to help us find that as well. We're still looking for needles in haystacks, but we've got a lot more haystacks now, but a lot more magnets to find those needles. So that's kind of glorious. The film itself will, the length of it will depend on the images that we find and the stories that we tell. So a film doesn't necessarily need to just only have images, but there might be some narration or some beautiful words, can you imagine, in Guelga that come up, to describe this place perhaps. So I'm as interested as you are, Sarah, in what this final film will be.
Lovely. So we're running out of time. I will ask you just one last question, and then we'll let the audience ask you some questions. What's next? Where to next? What's the next step? What do you need?
Well, we want your stories. If you have them, please share them. We'll have contact detail up here at the end, just an email address, but also feel free to come up to me at any point, or Erin. And yeah, if you would like your story to be part of this collection, please let us know. We'd love that. The aim of the project is to be finished in time for Eureka celebrations this year, so aiming for December.
So it's the 170th this year, and so it's a beautiful time to be greening Ballarat.
So yeah.
Lovely. Lovely. Thank you everyone for joining us today at this Ballarat Heritage Festival event. Please thank Erin and Bracey.